So before we turn our attention to spring practices in the class of 2023, I've been going through various different recruiting classes, picking out individuals and position groups that I think are interesting additions to the institutions that got them. And today, we need to talk about that interior defensive line position for the Oklahoma Sooners because they lost two names from that group, Winfrey and Isaiah Thomas, that were phenomenal playmakers, and we need to talk about how OU can equalize those losses. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Y for yes, N for no. Do you believe that Jalen Redmond is the next name to know on that defensive line position group? And let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed the content, like and comment down below. Those interactions are truly massive to content creators such as myself in both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all that being said, let's hop right into this. And we first need to start with what Oklahoma lost. Because when we're talking about Winfrey and Isaiah Thomas, these are two phenomenally gifted players at that defensive line position. Winfrey is an individual who had over 10 tackles, who had over 5 sacks, and followed that up by going to the Senior Bowl and earning MVP honors. So he's someone who's going to be garnering the attention of scouts as he goes through the draft process. But likewise for Isaiah Thomas is someone who I feel like is sliding slightly under the radar relative to where their production was. 18 solo tackles, 8 sacks. He's someone who I think is going to be a nice piece for whatever team eventually gets him, and he's going to be playing on Sundays, a name we need to keep on the forefront of our minds. But these two guys right here combined for over 13 sacks from the interior of Oklahoma's defense, and now you combine that with Nick Bonito on the edge, you can start to paint the picture of the importance of these individuals on that defensive front for the Sooners, especially when you're already replacing pieces on the back end as well. So what is it that Oklahoma can do to replace that production that they lost from those two? Well, first and foremost, before we even get into the recruiting class and transfer portal acquisitions, you have Jalen Redmond, and that's not alone. You have a lot of talented guys that can step up and make a name for themselves, but Jalen Redmond I bring to the forefront because he's someone who I think a lot of people are really expecting to take a major step. Very talented player, and he could be the guy on this team and take massive steps in his development and also his national notoriety. I think Redmond is someone who could be poised for a big year, which is why I included him in the intro of this video, a video more specifically talking about the transfer portal and recruiting acquisitions. But now let's get to that part, right? Let's get to the juicy stuff. What is it that Oklahoma brought in, both in recruiting and the transfer portal, that I think is going to be big in replacing the production they lost? Well, quite simply, Oklahoma had a really solid haul on the interior defensive line position group through both of those means. Through recruiting, you got 3 individuals, such as 3-star defensive lineman Cedric Roberts, 3-star defensive lineman Alton Tarber, and then 4-star defensive lineman Grayson Halton, who was a victim of the coaching carousel, being originally committed to Oregon, but with Mario Cristobal leaving that situation and going to Miami, Halton's future was up in the air, and ultimately Oklahoma wins that battle. A battle that I think is going to be massively important because I'm a big fan of Grayson Halton. I think he's going to be someone that's going to come in there, continue to develop, and make a name for himself for the Sooners. But likewise with Roberts and Tarber, you're talking about 2 guys that have a really nice ceiling, and if they can continue developing, you love what you got from the defensive line position group standard in that recruiting class. Now, would you have liked to get in Gabriel Brownlow-Dendy? Absolutely. Every institution in the nation would never argue with the 5-star interior defensive lineman, and especially with one with the versatility and ability that Brownlow-Dendy possesses. But at the end of the day, when I do look at what they got in recruiting, I do think that you got some pieces that you need to be excited about in those 3 names right there through the recruiting process. But they weren't just using traditional recruiting means. With the transfer portal being as active as it is in the college football world, Oklahoma has been exercising that ability frequently, and the defensive line position is no exception. Jeffrey Johnson and Jonah Luulu are 2 names that I really like that Oklahoma was able to get in. Jeffrey Johnson is someone that Sooner fans got to see in action this past season. Being a defensive lineman for Tulane, he was disruptive against the Sooners, and if you go back and watch, really focus in on him, and I think you're going to be very pleased with what you see. A disruptive defensive lineman that I think is going to really come in here and hit the ground running for the Sooners. He was a major win because he's someone that not only has the talent, but has the experience, being a collegiate football player that you know, with the new coaching staff coming into Oklahoma, when they're losing the production that they lost in Winfrey and Thomas, they're looking at a situation where Jeffrey Johnson is not only very talented, he's experienced, and you can go back and watch collegiate film of him and understand how to best use him and put him in positions to be successful. That's big for this coaching staff considering what they lost on the interior of their defensive line. And remember, even though you have a bunch of guys in the interior defensive line already on roster that I think could make that next step, we talked about Jalen Redmond, but he's only one of a few. The ability to be able to get in more depth is going to be massive, because at the point where you have 13 plus sacks from the interior, you're really taking a lot of pressure off your back end, and Oklahoma's already replacing pieces on their back end as well. So every bit of production you can equalize on the front is only going to help your secondary come along. But we need to also talk about the other addition Oklahoma got out of the transfer portal, because I loved what they did on the defensive line position group through the transfer portal. Jeffrey Johnson, I thought, was a great addition, but also Jonah Luulu from Hawaii. Luulu is an individual that when he got to Hawaii, instantly started turning heads, and it didn't take long for him to start displaying his athleticism. So whenever you're able to get in the guys through the traditional recruiting class, such as Tarber, Roberts, and Holton, you're already sitting there really liking what you got. You now add in Jeffrey Johnson and Jonah Luulu, and now you're sitting there looking at a situation where when you add in the pieces Oklahoma already has, you're feeling a bit more comfortable at being able to attempt to replicate the production loss from the interior of that defensive line. Something that I do believe is going to be big, and I don't think it has to come with individuals mirroring the seasons that Perion Winfrey and Isaiah Thomas had. I don't think that's necessary. I do believe, though, that as a collective, you do have to get close to matching that production, especially with pieces being new on the secondary as well. The good news is, though, is that Oklahoma has some pieces on this defense that did get experience last year throughout the field, but more specifically on this defensive line group, the ability to get in Johnson, the ability to get in Luulu is something that's major for this team, and it's going to allow them to hit the ground running, because you know that these guys are not only talented, you know they've translated to the collegiate game, and not only can they help you hit the ground running, they can help the development of the younger guys in that room. So this is going to be a position group we have got to watch for the Oklahoma Sooners, not only because I think Jalen Redmond is poised for a major boom this year, but I also really do like what Oklahoma got not only in the recruiting department, but especially in the transfer portal in Jeffrey Johnson and Jonah Luulu. I love those two additions. I think they're two additions that we're going to be looking and talking about around the mid-season point for the Sooners, saying how these two guys have been difference makers for Brent Venables and company in their first year because of the talent and the experience they bring to the table. With all that being said, I'm very interested in hearing from y'all. Hop down to the comments and let me know who you think is in for a big year on that interior defensive line for the Oklahoma Sooners. That's it. See ya.